Hey everybody, my name is Diane. Welcome to End Times Bible Study, and this is a weekly in-person Bible study that we live stream through Facebook, and then it's uploaded to my YouTube channel the next day. So we talk about end times issues in this study, and tonight we are discussing who is Mystery Babylon. Revelation 17 revisits it. And so we covered Revelation 17 when we did our 2021 Revelation Bible study. So the people who are here tonight actually were in that Bible study. So a bit of a review. But at that time, I was following the fourth empire of Daniel being Rome. And since then, through studying the Bible, it appears that it's not Rome, but a more likely scenario is that the fourth empire was the Ottoman Empire / Islamic Caliphate. So we believe that the final beast empire is going to be an Islamic Caliphate. So I kind of wanted to look at this again in light of that instead of, the Roman Empire. And so tonight we're going to read Revelation 17. We are going to identify the actual biblical criteria for Mystery Babylon and then discuss possible locations for Mystery Babylon. And honestly, when you really look at the biblical criteria, you can kind of rule out some things right off the bat just by the biblical criteria. So just a quick recap of Revelation 16 just for context, because where we are in Revelation at this point in time, the Revelation 16 is the final 7 bowls of wrath that are poured out by 7 angels. So they start pouring out the bowls. So then sores break out on those with the mark of the beast. Then all the water turns to blood in bowls 2 and 3. The 4th angel pours on the sun, and then the sun is like literally burning people. It's like scorching them with fire. The 5th bowl is the throne of the throne of the beast, and his kingdom was plunged into darkness. The 6th bowl is where the Euphrates dries up to prepare the way for kings of the east. We have the 3 demonic spirits that go out to summon the kings, and then they assembled the kings in the place that in Hebrew is called Armageddon. So that's where we are through that. And then the 7th bowl is poured out, and we have flashes of lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder, and a great earthquake, the likes of which had not occurred since men were upon the earth. So like worst ever. And verse 19 says, the great city was split into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations collapsed. So I think the great city there is talking about Jerusalem. And then it goes on to say, and God remembered Babylon the Great and gave her the cup of the wine of the fury of his wrath. So note that Babylon the Great is destroyed at the very end of the tribulation. I mean, we've already got Armageddon ready to happen, and then the 7th bowl's poured out, it's destroyed, and then after that, Jesus returns, and there's the Battle of Armageddon in chapter 19. So chapter 17 and 18 are kind of like, a little bit of kind of a backtrack. I forget how we called it last time. It was like parenthetical, yeah, where John's given some additional information into exactly how Babylon was going to be destroyed. So 17, let's go ahead and so the cast of characters for Revelation 17, you've got the woman, also known as the great prostitute, a scarlet beast with 7 heads and 10 horns, and then you have the waters where the woman is seated, which actually represents people. So that's our cast that we're looking at. So let's start with verse 1 in chapter 17. Then one of the 7 angels with the 7 bowls came and said to me, come, I will show you the punishment of the great prostitute who sits on many waters. Now, just jumping ahead to verse 15 in the same chapter, it defines the waters that are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. So that's, so you've got this image of this prostitute sitting on these waters, which is like basically kind of a worldwide sort of thing. people from all over. And then in verse 2, the kings of the earth were immoral with her, and those who dwell on the earth were intoxicated with the wine of her immorality. So this is really referring to like a spiritual idolatry. I mean, obviously, if the woman, as we see, it's a city, you're not having sexual relations with a city for the kings and other people. It's basically, the image is of just total spiritual idolatry and false worship, worship of false gods, basically. All right, so then in verse 3, the inhabitants of the earth were intoxicated with the wine of her adulteries or immorality. Okay, all right, now verse 3. And the angel carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness. Now, Dean, your version, you use King James, it probably says desert, right? Oh, it says wilderness? Are you using King James? Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. Well, if you look it up, because you can go on Bible Hub and look up each thing, and they either translated, but it seemed about 50-50. Some translated wilderness, some desert. But this is actually an important point, so we'll get back to that in a second. But he's carried away into a wilderness where I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was covered with blasphemous names and had 7 heads and 10 horns. All right, so this is kind of the first clue, is that this city is located in a desert. And the Greek word there is erémos, and it's the Strong's Exhaustive Concordance says desert, desolate, solitary wilderness. Now, this was an interesting point because Matthew 24, which we did at that Matthew 24 study 2 months ago or something, a little while back. Matthew 24:26, Jesus is talking and he's warning about, when he returns, everyone's going to see him. They will know. And so just backing up to verse 23, at that time, if anyone says to you, look, here is the Christ, or there he is, do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and wonders that would deceive even the elect, if that were possible. See, I have told you in advance. Verse 26, so if they tell you, there he is in the wilderness, do not go out. And that's the same Greek word, erémos. And so I was like, I wonder, Dean, you want to say something?
Just a very small point, Diane.
Okay.
For what it's worth, the King James says the wilderness, but the Berean Bible says a wilderness. Back to verse 3, so it could be a slightly different interpretation there. The wilderness suggests maybe south of Jerusalem, it was the wilderness where Jesus wandered. It was the wilderness, right?
Uh-huh.
But a wilderness suggests it could be anywhere, right?
Yeah, okay, wait, and so which one? Yeah, mine says a wilderness. You're saying King James says the
wilderness.
Yeah, that would be an interesting point to look that up on Bible Hub and see if we could find out from the Greek. I looked that up on a different verse, but I didn't look that up. But I did think that was interesting because I'm wondering if this wilderness, in a sense, I mean, the point. All right, so I am using Joel Rosenberg's book, Mystery Babylon, largely for what we're talking about tonight, and he actually thinks that the city of Mecca in Saudi Arabia, he thinks that's Mystery Babylon. So I'm not sure I'm still 100% convinced on that because, which we'll talk more about. But if that's the case, because he's saying it has to be in a desert and that Mecca fits that, it's like Saudi Arabia is a desert and it fits that location. But I'm just with Jesus basically saying that here he is in the wilderness, is it basically like people are going to say, oh, here he is in Mecca, or, if that turns out to be in other words, he's almost like tying the wilderness where the Mystery Babylon, where the woman is sitting, to the same place. I mean, I don't know. That was kind of what I was getting from that, but I don't know if anyone else has any comments on that. No. Okay. So, let's see. And then I have Isaiah 21:1 I wanted to mention. Let me find that. I was reading there's a lot in Isaiah and Jeremiah talking about prophecies about the destruction of Babylon. So there's a lot of interesting stuff in there that we will hope maybe get to, in the next week or so. But yeah, so this starts out as Babylon has fallen, and they are correlating Isaiah 21 with Revelation 18, 1 through 8. And it says, this is the burden against the desert by the sea. And so that's what it's like. Basically, Babylon is referred to as a desert by the sea, if you continue on with the context of that. So that was clearly the case for the original Babylon. And I'm still wondering if it's, a literal rebuilt Babylon. That was our theory last time when we did this. And I don't know. So that still could be the case, but we'll see. All right.
Verse 2 of that same scripture, though.
Of which scripture? Of Isaiah?
Isaiah 21.
Yeah.
Like whirlwinds sweeping through the Negev. The Negev is essentially
a desert. Yeah, isn't that a desert in Israel?
Right next to Saudi Arabia.
It's right next to Saudi Arabia?
Yeah. Well, it's in the south side, south of Jerusalem.
South of Jerusalem, yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, right, because it's like whirlwind sweeping through the Negev, an invader comes from the desert, from a land of terror. So, yeah, I don't know. So, I mean, I still was struggling with some of these Old Testament references, if I really think it fits with it being Mecca, but we'll get more into that as we go through here. All right, so then, where were we on 17? Okay, so then verse 4. Oh, wait, I think we read all of 3. The woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was covered. Yeah, okay. Verse 4. The woman was dressed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls. She held in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of her sexual immorality. And so bear in mind, if the woman is a city, and so she's dressed, purple and scarlet are implying like royalty, and then the gold, precious stones, and pearls are implying like massive wealth. Okay, a very rich city, and then the golden cup full of abominations and the filth for adultery. So then verse 6. Or actually, I'm sorry, we're on 5. And on her forehead, a mysterious name was written. And some translations, I think King James says, Mystery Babylon the Great. Right?
NIV does.
NIV does. Okay, yeah. And, but this one, mine, I use Berean Standard Bible. It says, a mysterious name was written on her forehead. Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and of the abominations of the earth. So one of Joel Richardson's points in his book is that if it's really the literal Babylon, like a rebuilt Babylon that's in play, why would it say mystery? Like, what's the mystery then? So his point was that that's kind of pointing to something other than a literal rebuilt Babylon. So, but let's look. I'm going to read Jeremiah 51:7. I've actually got that verse written down here. So Babylon was a gold cup in the hand of the Lord, making the whole earth drunk. The nations drank her wine, therefore the nations have gone mad. So that, just kind of going along with that whole imagery there about the cup and so forth. And then also in the Old Testament, physical fornication and adultery were often considered symbolic of spiritual fornication. In other words, idolatry. In Hosea 4:11 through 12, which, if memory serves, Hosea was basically told to marry a prostitute, and it was a whole symbolic thing dealing with Israel's spiritual idolatry. But verse 11 in chapter 4, promiscuity, wine, and new wine take away understanding. My people consult their wooden idols, and their divining rods inform them, for a spirit of prostitution leads them astray, and they have played the harlot against their God. So that's just, kind of pointing that out. I'm just moving this heater. It's like blowing. I feel like it's blowing my hair somehow. It's like we have the Arctic blast this week, so I've got a little space heater trying to keep us warm. All right, so let me see. All right, so moving on, it says in verse 6, I could see that the woman was drunk with the blood of the saints and witnesses for Jesus, and I was utterly amazed at the sight of her. So I think that's an important point to remember too. This is a city that's known for, and again, I mean, this is something that's taking place in the end times, but a massive amount of killing of Christians, and I would venture to guess Jews as well. I mean, it just says saints and witnesses for Jesus, but you know, if you're talking about an Islamic caliphate, we know Jews will be on the list to be killed, as well as Christians, but we need a city that's going to fit that criteria, you know, in order to say, well, such and such is Mystery Babylon. All right, so then in verse 7, he says, "Why are you so amazed?" said the angel. "I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and 10 horns." So now we're going to discuss more about the beast. So that was kind of more about the woman. All right, the beast that you saw, it was and now is no more, but is about to come up out of the abyss and go to its destruction. And those who dwell on the earth, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, will marvel when they see the beast that was and is not and yet will be. So let's first flip back to just Revelation 11:7, because that's where it's the 2 witnesses who have been testifying in Jerusalem for the first 3.5 years of the tribulation. And it says that in verse 7, "When the 2 witnesses have finished their testimony, the beast that comes up from the abyss will wage war with them and will overpower and kill them." So that's like the Antichrist. You know, the beast is always referred, or the Antichrist is always referred to as a beast in Revelation. And that goes back to Daniel 7 as well, where they first talk about the beasts and these empires. We'll get into that more in a second. But now Joel Richardson had an interesting point, because he feels like it is talking about the Antichrist, but he also felt like it's talking about, because the 7th empire, we're going to talk about these 7 empires, the 7 heads in a second, and that the 7th empire is the Ottoman Empire, the, you know, / Islamic Caliphate, and that existed, and so, you know, it was, then it was not. I mean, it fell out after World War I, it was dismantled, and then it's like now it's coming back again. So I thought that was interesting, if that's, you know, as far as that goes as an interpretation. So, all right. And then as far as Marvel, that also fit with Revelation 13:3. But let's, I want to look over, let's see, because, all right, so let's talk some more about the 7 heads. Okay, so, all right, verse 9. "This calls for a mind with wisdom," which again is basically implying, okay, I'm kind of off track on my outline, but it's probably referring to you need spiritual discernment in order to understand this. You know, it's like going to be pretty hard to understand otherwise, and even with spiritual discernment, I feel like it's still challenging. So, but anyways, all right. So, interesting point. Yes.
They didn't say this calls for a mind with schooling or intelligence, but wisdom.
Yeah.
Wisdom is a different animal than just knowledge, right?
That's true. And I think...
So, hence the spiritual.
Right, because wisdom comes from God. You know, like, that's not something you're going to really get without God's help. So, but yeah, so... But the beast, okay, yeah, I want to actually backtrack up to verse 7 where it says, the beast that carries her, so that you have this vision of this gaudy woman basically riding this beast with, a scarlet beast with 7 heads and 10 horns, covered with blasphemous names. So right off the bat, we know, it's evil with the blasphemy mentioned. But as far as the 7 heads and 10 horns, Revelation 12:3, let's flip back to that because that's the woman and the dragon. It's also an interesting contrast because in 12:3, the woman in this passage is like the good woman. It's like almost like the good woman versus the bad woman, because the woman in 12 is Israel. And it's like she's, pregnant, she's crying out, she's going to give birth, so it's like she's giving birth to Jesus, meaning Israel, produces, in a sense, the Messiah. And then in verse 3, another sign appeared in heaven, a huge red dragon with 7 heads, 10 horns, and 7 royal crowns on his heads. So we're not going to read, this whole passage, but it's clearly Satan being talked about here. And then, but notice he's got 7 heads, 10 horns, and 7 royal crowns on his heads. Now we'll look at Revelation 13:1, which is at the end of chapter 12, we have the dragon, which is Satan, stood on the shore of the sea. So you've got Satan standing there on the shore of the sea, and then this beast comes up out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads rising out of the sea. There were 10 royal crowns on its horns and blasphemous names on its heads. The beast I saw was like a leopard with the feet of a bear and the mouth of a lion. And the dragon, Satan, gave the beast, which is the Antichrist, his power and his throne and great authority. So, and that goes back to Daniel 7. So when we did the Daniel 7 study, or just Daniel in general, but Daniel 7 was where it first started talking about these beasts and that they represented empires. And so like Daniel 7, he had, there was the same exact animals, the lion, the leopard, and the bear. So it seems like now in Revelation, we're getting a picture of like a conglomeration. These previous empires are all kind of now combined into this Antichrist. So, and it had one of the heads of the beast appeared to be mortally wounded, but the mortal wound was healed, and the whole world marveled and followed the beast. Once we're thinking about these 7 heads as being 7 empires, I was again even like, is that even referring more to an empire versus like the Antichrist with a physical wound? I mean, it does say down in verse, in verse 14 that the false prophets telling them to make an image to the beast that had been wounded by the sword and yet had lived. So I don't know. It's kind of interesting. Which is it, or is it both? Is it referring to an empire as one of the heads that was injured, or is it just, he does have some sort of, the Antichrist will have some sort of injury that he survives in what appears to be a miraculous fashion?
You were reading a minute ago about the woman sitting on the 7 mountains.
Yeah.
And we were thinking before that was the hills around the city or whatever. But
right.
Mountains are often referred to also as like governments.
Yes, kingdoms.
Kingdoms. So
yes.
Could have been.
I know.
In other words, it could have been a stretch of time. This woman, because then it talks about 5 are gone, one's here. And
right. Right.
It could be referring to the kingdoms that this woman has.
Exactly. I know. We're all hung up on the 7, the 7 hills and which cities, and it might not even be that. Because, so let's skip down to verse 9. I think I covered. Yes, the only difference, like Satan had 7 heads, 10 horns, and 7 royal crowns on his heads. So, which implies, if these 7 heads are all representing these empires, that's representing like their kingdoms. But then the Antichrist, 7 heads, 10 horns, that's the same, and then 10 royal crowns on his horns, because those 10 royal crowns, as we're going to see, those are the 10 kings that make up the Antichrist kingdom, the final beast kingdom. So, so that was kind of interesting about that. But again, notice the similarity between Satan and the Antichrist. I mean, that's because, it's like the Antichrist is a tool of Satan, probably indwelt by Satan, and Satan's giving him all his power and authority to the Antichrist. So, all right, so now let's look more at the, all right, so the beast, yeah, so we kind of talked about Daniel 7 a little bit, but so what, it seems like what this could be is that Revelation 17 is a conglomeration of 7 historical pagan empires with the 7 heads representing each of these kingdoms. So now let's look at, we're going to read 9 and 10. This calls for mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. So is it 7 kingdoms on which this city is based? Because the woman's representing this, it's a city. There are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come. But when he does come, he must remain for only a little while. So let's try to unpack that. So 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come. And so mountains can refer, as Dean pointed out, that can refer to kingdoms in the Bible. And Daniel 2, 34 through 35 plus 44, verse 44, that is talking about a mountain. I think that was the mountain that comes up at the end that crushes all the other, which is God's kingdom. And Isaiah 2:2 was another reference. So the 7 mountains could refer to 7 kingdoms representing 7 world empires embodied in their rulers. So the 5 that have fallen, it would be Egypt. And this kind of the pattern for these kingdoms is that they all basically interacted with Israel in one way or another. Like Egypt, they enslaved the Israelites for a time. And then, of course, Moses had to lead them out, lead the Israelites out, and that whole situation. So Egypt would be the first one. Then Assyria. Now Assyria conquered the 10 northern tribes of Israel, and then that was a huge catastrophe for Israel. It was a judgment on them because of all the idolatry and evil that they had fallen into, and they would not listen to the prophets with warning after warning to repent. And then the same thing happened to the next kingdom would be Babylon, who also then they conquered the southern 2 tribes of remaining tribes that was known as Judah. And again, the exact same situation, would not listen to the prophets, gross idolatry and sin. And so Babylon not only conquered Judah, but also they were the ones who destroyed the Jewish temple. So then after that, Persia conquered Babylon. And, they were, the Persians in general, at least initially, they were like letting the Jews go back and, they were finding some favor. But we did have the situation with Haman in the book of Esther, where he was trying to exterminate all of the Jews. There was a whole plot by this Haman character. Then you have Greece that conquers Persia, the Persian Empire. And again, we have, for the most part, Israel was allowed to kind of do their own thing. But under Antiochus Epiphanes, there was horrendous persecution and desecration of their temple. And he was clearly an Antichrist prototype. So we have that under Greece. Then, of course, Greece is conquered by Rome. So at the time, John's seeing this, it says 1 is. So we're assuming that that's talking about, okay, John's alive now. Rome is the empire in charge. And again, Rome, Jesus is crucified under the Roman Empire, and Rome destroys, Jerusalem and the temple in 70 AD. So, you kind of see this pattern here. The next one, it says, the 7th one, let's see, where was it? The other has not yet come, but when he does come, he must remain for only a little while. So the next empire that came after Rome was the Ottoman Empire that conquered, a good bit of, again, as we've looked at the maps before when we were studying this, a lot of these empires kind of seem to recapitulate each other with, a lot of the similar land that would come into play, and they just, that would just keep happening. So, so the seventh beast empire that existed but then did not exist will come back as an eighth empire, according to Joel Richardson. That was an Islamic Antichrist, page 94. But one thing I did have a problem with in reading this passage, because it says, 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other has not yet come, but when he does come, he must remain for only a little while. And it's like, well, I have to say the Ottoman Empire lasted for 500 years or something. Or longer, or maybe it was even longer than that by the time from when they conquered Constantinople. I think they were kind of around, but anyways, either way, it was like hundreds of years.
At least as long as all the others.
Yeah, at least as long as all the others. So, the Bible does tend to kind of skip things, so was it more just referring to the final beast empire, which we know will only be, a 7-year period, or is it a translation problem? So that was one I did look up on Bible Hub, and the way, I looked at the Greek words, and it says, I'll just read it from what they have, how they have it from the Greek. And kings 7 there are, the 5 are fallen, the 1 is, the other not yet has come, and when he shall have come a little while, him it behooves to remain. So that's how it shows, with the actual Greek words. But actually, if you're thinking about it in terms of, they're kingdoms, but they're also kings, and the final king, it is the Antichrist. It is only 7 years, so maybe that's, I don't know. Thoughts on that?
Can you read that again?
The Greek thing?
Yeah.
Okay. The Greek said, and kings 7 there are, the 5 are fallen, the 1 is, the other not yet has come, and when he shall have come a little while, him it behooves to remain. But it actually, from what it's saying there, is talking about, in a sense, specific kings. I don't know if in a sense you would say for each period, each one of the empires, obviously they had numerous kings, but were some of the ones more like Antiochus Epiphanes for Greece would be kind of the king in play, like whatever the king was that was kind of oppressing at the time.
The language, let's suggest one specific fellow who will only be there for a short time. So maybe that is...
Yeah, right. Maybe that's what it's trying to say.
Yeah.
Should we do okay, I was having troubles there. Well, yeah, so there was that. That was interesting. And then, so now it goes on to say the beast that was and now is not, we're in verse 11, is an 8th king who belongs to the other 7 and is going into destruction. So again, it's like the final, you had the 7 kingdoms and you've got this 8th beast empire, and the Antichrist is the 8th king. The 10 horns you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but will receive 1 hour of authority as kings along with the beast, or the Antichrist. These kings have one purpose: to yield their power and authority to the beast. So, I think I've fallen into this before. Probably a lot of us have, the EU, do they have 10 nations? Or, the BRICS nations, how many have they got, and whatnot. But I think it's pretty clear is that these kings aren't coming on the scene until the actual tribulation has started. That's what it looks like to me. Any thoughts from anybody else?
Just a curiosity, the language again in verse 11,
Yeah.
The beast that was, and now is not, is an eighth king who belongs to the other seven.
Yeah.
You have any inspiration on what that means?
Well, the only thing I could think is that they're all pagan kingdoms. They're pagan kingdoms. So, in a sense, they're all related from that point. And they also were all, all of them ruled over Israel, except the final, by the time the Ottoman Empire, Israel they ceased to become a nation like by the 1st century, AD. So they really, I think you still had, Jerusalem had, was still around, had been rebuilt and by the Romans, and you had Jews living there and, different people living there in Jerusalem throughout the centuries. So, but they really weren't an autonomous kingdom at that point. That's the only difference I could really see as far as that goes. But yeah, I don't know. Anybody else have any insights on, he belongs to the seven, or the eighth king belongs to the other seven. Again, the only thing I can think of is, like I said, each of those empires basically just recapitulated the same territory throughout the centuries. And so from that sense, they're all kind of related from that point. So
maybe we're reading too much into it. Well, the previous text was talking about kings. Kings.
Yeah.
Now he shifts to the beast.
Yeah.
Which we know has very symbolic language and all.
Right.
And maybe he's just saying, he's a king too, and he's just like the other seven. Like, when I'm saying a king that is then going to be, dealt with, right?
Yeah.
It's not a real beast, it's a king.
Well, right, yeah. Well, yeah, that's true. Is an eighth king, yeah, it's identifying him like as a physical person.
Right.
All right.
Like the other seven kings.
Yeah. So, let me see, did I have any other notes on that? Not really. Okay, then just talking about the seven mountains, because again, we're like, okay, well, just like we were like, hey, whose name has 666 in it, And we're like, oh, what cities have seven mountains, and I think that's it, I don't think there's anything wrong with thinking about those things and looking. We're given these clues so that we can look and be, understand the signs and the times. But, unfortunately Anne couldn't be here. Last week she was saying that some teacher she was listening to said, oh, it has to be Rome because that's the only city that's on 7 hills or whatever.
Didn't you teach otherwise?
Yeah, I have taught otherwise, but we did this before. Wikipedia. Wikipedia lists over 100 cities, over 100 supposedly built on 7 hills. So I'm like, well, okay, I don't know who that other guy was, but that's not correct information. Some of the ones like Staten Island and Yonkers made the list. So did Washington, D.C., Athens, Greece, Jerusalem, which we had covered that previously as well, and then also Amman, Jordan. Okay, and then Mecca, Saudi Arabia, which I'm like, well, that's what Joel Richardson thinks it is. And that was interesting. That one showed up with 7 mountains or hills. Tehran, Iran is one. Also Istanbul, Turkey. And I highlighted that one. Istanbul was Constantinople. That was the last capital of the Roman Empire until they were conquered by the Ottoman Empire. And, it seems to me from just when we did all those other studies on Daniel and so forth, that I think the Antichrist is probably going to be from Turkey. I think Gog of Magog, Gog is the Antichrist and Magog is Turkey. So I thought, well, that's interesting because that one was on 7 hills. And then Kiev, Ukraine, Moscow, Russia, of course, Rome, Italy, so those were just a few, but you can just put that, go look up on Wikipedia, give you the entire list of everybody. But for me, I feel like it's going to be.
Seems like if you were going to build a city in ancient times, the whole city seen that.
Why would it have to have 7 hills?
I'm just saying, like, that was just their choice. Oh, we can't build here, so we got 6 hills.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if maybe for defensive purposes. Okay, Dean was just making a joke. Yeah, but I mean, in a sense, it can make it, I think it could make your city more difficult to conquer, I would think, if you got it built.
Easily defended, perhaps?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, you could defend it more easily. It'd be harder to conquer it. But anyways, yeah, so that was kind of crazy. But for me, I really feel like in all the studies we've done that, again, the Bible is Israel-centric. I mean, that is the whole theme of the Bible is the nation of Israel and Jerusalem, by and large. So, and how God is bringing his Messiah through the Jewish people, his chosen people. And, so from start to finish, and it's all tying together into one narrative. So the action all takes place, and we saw this when we were doing those Armageddon studies, it's all taking place in the Middle East. It's all taking place around Israel. And even for Armageddon, when we were looking at some of those passages, it said all the nations are coming against Israel, but then it said the surrounding nations. And that's really, when you're looking at the Gog-Magog thing, those are like the surrounding nations. I mean, that's what, again, is a theme that keeps reoccurring. So I feel like Mystery Babylon has to be a city in the Middle East. There's no other city that could work that's not in that surrounding area. So anyways, all right, so now let's talk about the 10 horns, or the 10 kings who've not yet received a kingdom, and they get 1 hour of authority. And they have one purpose: yield their power and authority to the Antichrist. So again, that's correlating with the 10 toes of Nebuchadnezzar's dream. So that's back to Daniel chapter 2, with the whole huge statue, which Babylon was the head of the statue. And then if this is correct, then we had like Medo-Persia, then Greeks, then it went to the Islamic Caliphate, or the Ottoman Empire is the 4th kingdom, and then the feet and the toes, that's like the revised Antichrist empire. So those 10 toes are corresponding to the 10 horns. And then the 10 horns were first mentioned in Daniel 7:7, which again, that it originally when we taught that, or I taught it, I was like, oh yeah, that's Rome, is the 4th empire. But then I looked at it one time later, I was just like, oh my gosh, it just skips exactly, it doesn't even do the Islamic Caliphate. It just goes immediately to the Beast Empire in Daniel 7, when it's talking about these 4 kingdoms. So the 4th one, I think, really is just the Antichrist kingdom, and they talk about the 10 horns there. So again, we use the scripture, interpret scripture to figure these things out. You really can't just read Revelation 17 by itself and think, okay, yeah, I understand it all perfectly. We are correlating it with the rest of the Bible, and that's how you can understand it. At least better. Maybe we're still struggling a little bit. At least I am. All right. So let me see where we are. So let's get back to the text. So verse 14 in chapter 17, they will make war against the Lamb, and the Lamb will triumph over them, because he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and he will be accompanied by his called and chosen and faithful ones. So that's actually, to me, jumping ahead there. Number one, it's a nice reminder that as bleak as things are, and these beasts and all this horrible stuff happening, that God is still on the throne, and Jesus, who's the Lamb, triumphs in the end. And this is all playing out according to his will and purpose. But Revelation 19 talks about his physical return with, the armies of heaven. So accompanied by his called and chosen and faithful ones. So, all right, so then verse 15, let's see here. Then the angel said to me, the waters you saw where the prostitute was seated are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues, or languages. All right, so let's just skip back to Revelation 7:9, because that was a scene in heaven that John recorded, and it basically says the same thing there. So John's seeing this in heaven. After this I looked and saw a multitude too large to count from every nation and tribe and people and tongue standing before the throne and before the Lamb. So again, it's talking about like worldwide, and it skips down to say who they are in verse 14. The angel said, "These are the ones who have come out of the great tribulation. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb." And it goes on from there. But the Great Tribulation, and that's defined when we did the Matthew 24 study, that the last 3.5 years, Jesus described as the Great Tribulation. So again, there's going to be a huge number of people who do find salvation during the 7-year tribulation. Most of whom probably are martyred, but will be in heaven and so forth. But but here it's talking about the city, the prostitute is over. It's basically like worldwide. The city is exercising worldwide control over the people. So yeah, the note I had here, it points to Babylon the Great being a worldwide system, religious, political, and commercial, that dominates over humanity. And I will say, when we were doing this before, and we were kind of talking about Rome as the revised empire, but it makes more sense for Islam because that is a totalitarian system that's all-encompassing. It does cover all of that just by nature of its whole, system, I guess you could say. So, all right, so moving on, let's see here. All right, now verse 16. "And the 10 horns and the beast that you saw will hate the prostitute." So they hate the city that's ruling over. They will leave her desolate and naked and will eat her flesh and burn her with fire. So it's basically, to me, saying they're going to destroy this city that's ruling over with fire. And actually, I think that when you read chapter 18, which is more on Babylon the Great, and also some of the Old Testament passages, I actually think, because it's destroyed in 1 hour with fire, I think it's going to get nuked. I think whatever the city is will end up being nuked. So, but it says in verse 17, "For God has put it into their hearts to carry out his purpose by uniting to give their kingdom to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. And the woman you saw is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth." So there's the final thing where, I've been saying all along city, but it tells you at the very end, it's a city that's ruling over the kings of the earth. So, let's see here. So, how much time do we have? I do have on here just like a quick recap, because it's a great city that rules over the kings of the earth. It exercises control over peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues or languages. It's hated by the beast and his 10-king Antichrist empire. It's destroyed by fire by the beast empire, which accomplishes God's purposes. It's the center of spiritual idolatry, like the mother. We tend to say like the mother of all bombs for the biggest bomb. It's almost like the mother of all idolatry is what this city's representing. And the kings were drawn into her idolatry. It's located in the desert. It's seated on the Antichrist beast kingdom. And it's purple and scarlet, the royalty. It's also very wealthy with the stones and so forth. The name on the forehead was Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and the abominations of the earth. And it's drunk on the blood of the saints and the witnesses of Jesus. So I think keeping all that in mind, if you're really looking at what the criteria is, that kind of rules out some things. Again, it could be a literal rebuilt Babylon, which I'm still...
Where was prostitution first practiced?
Where was prostitution first practiced?
Was it Babylon? Old Babylon?
Oh, probably long before Babylon.
I've always heard it as the second oldest profession.
most of the second oldest profession.
Just keying in on it being the mother of prostitutes.
Well, I know, but if it's talking more about the spiritual aspect of it more so than the sexual, I think, is what the context seems to be. Because they really aren't talking, I mean, it's like the woman is a city, and then you've got these, you know, the Antichrist and so forth.
Just curiosity, maybe there's some connection.
Yeah.
Spirit over here, flesh and all that.
Yeah.
We often tend to mirror each other.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's certainly like, what do you call that, a metaphor? I always get confused, but it definitely, the act of prostitution is certainly, I guess, like a metaphor for the spiritual idolatry, which seems to be the bigger problem. But yeah, I don't know. Actually, Genesis has talks of, I mean, I remember it was one of Jacob's sons. You know, he had Jacob became Israel, he has the 12 sons. And I almost thought it was his son Judah that, like, his sons, a couple of sons had died, and so then there was like a widow from the son. And so Judah should have done something about the fact that this woman was a widow, and he didn't. And so she like disguised herself and like waited for him. He came into the city or whatever, and she like seduced him. And so he slept with her, and I'm trying to remember, did she get pregnant? I don't know. Do you remember? Anybody remember? Well, anyways, and it's somewhere in Genesis. But anyways, then she basically had kept some of his belongings, and she was able to prove it was her and confronted him, and he realized he had done wrong by her and so forth. But I mean, that was obviously, you know, prostitution happening there. It might be I don't know if that's the first time it's mentioned, but yeah. But anyways, that's a good thought though, because it's good to try to correlate, you know, and make those connections and see. But anyways, I'm still kind of leaning towards the little rebuild Babylon. I don't know. I'm doing more research. And we'll talk about it more next week. So we'll see if I've come to a conclusion. But as far as Rome, again, if you're reading this passage, and if Rome is, as the kingdom at the time, that's the 6th empire, well then if you've got a 7th empire, and then the revised empire, you know, it's like, well, is Rome then the 6th, 7th, and revised empire? You know, like that doesn't quite seem... Yeah, it doesn't seem to quite fit, you know, as far as Rome, and just a lot of other factors too. I mean, you could say they had, well, the 7 hills, which was true, but... I mean, the other thing too, if you're looking at drunk on the blood of the saints and witnesses for Jesus, is that really going to be what we'll be seeing from Rome? I mean, that fits in much better with Islam, you know, like the end times persecution where people are being beheaded and all that, more so than the Roman Catholic Church. You know, so... I mean, he goes into each one of these in his book, like, you know, like a chapter on all these. So I'm not going to go into all that much detail. People can either read the book or you can let me know if you've got specific questions. I have heard people say they think it's Jerusalem as the mystery Babylon, but honestly, I don't see that. I mean, Babylon in chapter 18, and even the Old Testament prophecies, which is why, okay, the destruction of Babylon that's described in the Old Testament has not been fulfilled. I mean, it seems like there was a fulfillment, an early fulfillment, but there's clearly a fulfillment still pending, and we'll look at that more later. But Jerusalem is the city where Jesus is going to return to rule and reign, and Jerusalem is going to continue on. And Babylon is like, it's going to be destroyed to never be inhabited again. So, you know, it just doesn't seem that it could be Jerusalem from that alone. You know, of course, New York City, the USA. Again, it's just, to me, disqualified from the point of, it's not in the Middle East, you know, and it's not about us in America, like we tend to think everything is about us. And, you know, it's not to say America's perfect, but, you know, there's also, I mean, if you want to talk about cities with rank paganism, I think you could find much more around the world, even like places in India and so forth. You know, they have like just all these pagan temples and just the rank idolatry that goes on, more so than America. But Richardson said that neither New York City nor the United States represents a religion, a religious system, the global capital of idolatry, or more specifically, the single greatest false religion that has ever existed. As we've already shown, the great harlot of Revelation represents all these things. Babylon, as the mother of harlots and the abominations of the earth, does not merely represent some general form of idolatry such as materialism or consumerism, which I'd say those would be America's bigger sins, would be that. No, she represents the biggest, the greatest, the vilest, and the most bloodthirsty religious system the world has ever known. For all of America's faults, there is simply no way that New York City or the United States can be criticized and twisted sufficiently to match the requirements of the prophecy. So he goes on to have more to say about it, you know, again, drunk on the blood of the saints, you know, but he also talks about apparently quite a few books have been written, you know, stating that America is Babylon. And so that's been something propounded by, you know, selling a lot of books, apparently. But really, I just don't see that that it's fitting what the Bible's actually saying. Let's see, where was another? Let's see. Yeah, the problem is the harlot's sin is the killing of not just innocents, but in particular witnesses of Jesus. She is guilty specifically of shedding the blood of prophets and of saints. And that's why the last days martyrs are described as having been beheaded because of their testimony of Jesus and because of the word of God. So he talks about that. Oh, and then this was also just the point about, he's talking about the desert and that, you know, again, there's no desert, you know. So I think that, you know, and again, neither New York City nor the greater United States has anything to do with the 7th and 8th beast empire, assuming that he is correct that that is the Islamic Caliphate. So again, I mean, bottom line is just the action in the Bible is all centered around Jerusalem. And really, the whole Bible's kind of almost been a conflict between Jerusalem, God's holy city, and Babylon, which was kind of the original, you know, the Tower of Babel, where they, right off the bat, after getting off the ark, within a few generations, they're already, you know, trying to build a tower to heaven and refusing God's instruction that they needed to spread out around the earth. Instead, they disobeyed that, and that's why judgment came. So, and, you know, and there was just a lot of idolatry that seemed like it started up early on in those cities, as we've seen through archaeology and some of the stuff we looked at last week too. So also then there's like the Illuminati New World Order. He said that he didn't think that had any credibility because again, they're secretive. There's not an actual city involved. You know, I mean, what if you're going to say, well, what's the city of the New World Order? You know, so he didn't give much weight to that. He did say it could be an unknown city not yet built. And then Mecca was his, so he devotes like the last several chapters of his book to going over why he thinks it's Mecca. So I'm going to save that for next week. Like next week I wanted to look at Revelation 17 and 18, you know, like are they the same Babylon? Because, you know, we did this study in 2021, you probably remember, Dean, but we were like, okay, Mystery Babylon is separate. It's like the religious system that gets destroyed by the beast, and that is that was different from the commercial Babylon, because we were like, that probably gets destroyed like at the midpoint, and then commercial Babylon gets destroyed at the end. So I'm still trying to think about how all this fits in. But I will say, contextually, it does seem like they're the same Babylon. But then there's also some other factors that, you know, kind of don't seem to fit in. So we'll go into that next week more. I wish I could say I have all the answers and I know everything 100%. But this Bible study is as much a journey for me as probably for everybody else. You know, I'm like trying to learn it and understand it as we go along. And sometimes like things we did a couple years ago, I'm like, okay, I don't think that's like the Gog Magog thing. That was a change. And then this being the, you know, not Rome as the fourth empire in Daniel, but the Islamic Caliphate. So yeah, we have to keep open minds, and as we study more and see what the Bible's really saying, sometimes it turns out we need to make a little bit of a shift. So, but yeah, so that's kind of that's 8 o'clock, so we went kind of long. But anybody have any final comments or questions? No. Oh, you got anything? No? Okay. All right. Well, everybody, thanks for tuning in, and we will plan to see everybody next week, hopefully, God willing. And, y'all, everybody take care. Bye.